breaking overnight. That standoff in Oregon turns deadly. A shootout erupts between the FBI and those anti-government protesters. One of the leaders of the group killed. His supporters say the rancher was murdered with his hands in the air. Our team on the scene right now.
We want to get right to the breaking news. In Oregon, the weeks-long standoff between armed anti-government protesters and law enforcement turning deadly overnight. The leader and several members of that group are now under arrest. ABC's Neil Karlinski has the latest in Burns, Oregon for us. Good morning, Neil.
Amy, good morning. A dramatic and sudden turn of events out here overnight with no warning. As a result, all of the group's leadership has now been arrested except for one armed rancher who was killed here by law enforcement overnight. This morning, a shootout between the armed occupiers of the Federal Wildlife Refuge in rural Oregon and police, including the FBI, has left one occupier dead and another wounded. Group leader Ammon Bundy and his brother were arrested in the shootout and could be seen handcuffed on the road. The armed militia seized control of this National Wildlife Refuge in early January, and they have occupied it ever since. Group spokesman Lavoy Finicum was killed in the shootout during a traffic stop along a highway outside the compound. He spoke with George earlier this month.
We have no intent of pointing a gun at anybody, but let's be clear here. Who's pointed guns at me? Who's pointed guns at Ammon? They have. Who said that we will shoot you? We never have. They have.
Ranch supporters claim he was murdered in cold blood. His daughter saying the father of 11 had his hands in the air when he was shot.
They just unloaded on him and just shot him like a whole bunch of times, and they killed him.
As a local hospital in the nearby town of Burns went on lockdown while treating one suspect, authorities said at least 8 were arrested, including an online blogger who supported the group.
Women and children need to get out of there right now.
And John Ritzheimer, famous for his online postings about being willing to risk everything in the standoff.
Although nobody here will fire that first shot.
The standoff, which was in its 24th day, had been mostly peaceful until now. But townspeople and Oregon's governor had expressed frustration the occupation had been allowed to continue so long. The big question now is what happens out at the Wildlife Refuge. People are still holed up inside there, and for the first time law enforcement has a presence there as well. They've actually set up roadblocks now throughout the area. There is also a concern that Lavoy Finicum could now be seen as a martyr. There is a great deal of anger here that he was killed at the hands of law enforcement. In fact, the group's Facebook page is filled with people posting about that. We'll continue to monitor the situation out here, Amy and George.
All right, Neil Karlinski, thank you. Some major developments now in that weeks-long standoff in Oregon between armed anti-government protesters and law enforcement. Overnight, police making more arrests as one of the jailed leaders calls on remaining militants to stand down and go home. ABC's Neil Karlinski is in Burns, Oregon with the very latest on all of that. Good morning to you, Neil.
Amy, good morning. Even though it's harder than ever to get a handle on exactly what's going on inside the compound, we do now know one thing for certain. Their numbers are definitely beginning to dwindle. This morning, jailed militant leader Ammon Bundy speaking out through his attorney and making an about face, telling his remaining supporters holed up on federal land to give up and go home.
I love you. Let us take this fight from here. Please stand down.
Overnight, the FBI taking into custody 3 more protesters, each facing 1 federal felony count of conspiracy. Police tightening their grip on the remaining militants, now sealed off by heavily armed FBI SWAT teams at roadblocks 8 miles out, as we found out when approaching.
We can't let anyone through this way.
Police spoke out Wednesday, but gave no details about how Oregon occupier Lavoy Finicum ended up shot to death by law enforcement following a traffic stop and sweeping series of arrests along a rural road. The action leaving the occupation's leadership behind bars, but at a deadly price.
It didn't have to happen. We all make choices in life. Sometimes our choices go bad.
The group's supporters claim Finicum was murdered while surrendering.
They shot Lavoy, literally murdered him, and was ambushed.
But an alleged witness in the convoy with the militant says that's not what happened.
He charged after law enforcement. He was not on his knees. That was a miscommunication.
This morning, investigators here are still sorting it all out and conducting a full investigation. Meanwhile, out at the compound, we now understand there are only 5 militants left, raising hopes that this long siege may soon be over, George.
Thanks, Neil.